Daily program begins right now.
Today's world news, what it means, where it's taking us.
I bring you the one and only possible message of world peace.
This is a message of hope, tremendous hope. And he said unto me, you must prophesy again.
The Trumpet Daily program begins right now.
The old relationship we had with the United States, based on deepening integration of our economies and tight security and military cooperations, is over. What exactly the United States does next is unclear. But what is clear is that we, as Canadians, have agency. We have power. We are masters in our own home. We will need to dramatically reduce our reliance on the United States. We will need to pivot our trade relationships elsewhere. And we will need to do things previously thought impossible at speeds we haven't seen in generations.
But I can assure you one thing, we're going to make sure that we inflict as much pain as possible to the American people without inflicting pain on the Canadian population. We have two options here. We either roll over as a country and he runs us over 15 times and gets what he wants, or we feel a little bit of pain and we fight like we've never fought before.
Wow, that's Doug Ford there. He presides over Ontario, I think. Let's inflict as much pain on America as possible. There you go. That's Canada. You think of that verse, Isaiah 9, I think it's verse 21. The division that's there in the brotherhood. And then think, too, about, we talked so long about the bitter affliction here in the United States. I mean, that's some bitter affliction right there. These far left leaders in Canada. And look at what they've done to their country. They're not going to talk about that. They're not going to talk about what communist government has done to make it virtually impossible to make your way in Canada. I mean, just even economically. And then, too, as I've pointed out this week and last week, just note, you see zero humility. Obviously, we're not looking to or relying on God, but there's just not an ounce of humility in world leadership today. We'll talk more about the coming perfect government that God's going to establish on this earth. You're listening to Stephen Flurry, and this is the Trumpet Daily. We appreciate you joining us on today's show. You can get to the live video stream of this program at trumpetdaily.com or at the Rumble channel, rumble.com/Trumpet Daily. Also, we'd love to get your feedback. You can email us, td@thetrumpet.com, or you can leave some comments underneath the videos there at Rumble. So now you look at, I guess Donald Trump had a phone conversation with Prime Minister Carney, or who will be, I guess, Prime Minister Carney. And note, he calls him Prime Minister now. No more, Governor Trudeau or Governor Carney. I mean, Donald Trump's looking like the reasonable man that wants to cut a deal. We know all about the tariffs. We talked about that yesterday. But this is what he tweeted out just this morning. Donald Trump. I just finished speaking with Prime Minister Mark Carney of Canada. It was an extremely productive call. He was the first one in the cold open that basically said the relationship's over. I mean, these leaders in Canada are sounding like radical extremists. That's what they are. It's over. It's done. I mean, in all of these loud pronouncements about tariffs, I can't remember Donald Trump saying, we want to inflict pain on Canada. We want to end the relationship with Canada. Now, I've pointed out some of the things that Donald Trump has said that are offensive. But even when he talks about their nasty negotiators, he's talking about the leadership. He's talking about the leaders primarily. That's Doug Ford, who was just elected to another 4-year term. So Ontario gets 4 more years of that, what you saw there. What did he say? We're going to inflict as much pain as possible on the American people. Congratulations, Ontario. And what's crazy is Pierre Poilievre, I think is how you say his name, he's the conservative, and his thinking pretty much aligns with the radical left. So with the upcoming elections, Canada really has no choice but to go to war with America. It's insane. Satan, you have to look at Satan's fingerprints here. As soon as the Antiochus is silenced here in America, well, then he shifts his focus over to the Antiochus to come out of the heart of Europe. And Canada, as it leans toward Europe, the EU, Great Britain, at least now, that does give the beast power a foothold on North America. As I say, there's some things that need to be sorted out. And we don't know all of the specifics, every single detail as to how these prophecies are going to unfold. But the beast power is rising. And I'm sure they're going to use anything and everything that they can coming out of Canada, again, as an excuse to build the military machine. We need it. Look at what Orange Hitler's doing to us. The relationship is over. When, if you're a Canadian or an American, when have you ever dreamed of one of the top leaders in Canada saying, we're going to inflict as much pain as possible on Americans? Americans, just American citizens. We agree on many things, said Donald Trump, talking about Carney, the conversation he had with him this morning. And we'll be meeting immediately after Canada's upcoming election to work on elements of politics, business, and other factors, all other factors, that will end up being great for both the United States of America and Canada. So, I mean, this sounds like Donald Trump's reaching out, even to the communist leaders that currently run the country. He said, thank you for your attention to this matter. That was just earlier this morning. What a time we're in, as I say. Look at Isaiah 9, verse 21, and you see all this infighting. You see all of these disputes between brothers, family division. I mean, we saw that play out in the spiritual family of Israel. It's talked about in Malachi 1. So many in Canada have been, I mean, they've just been overrun by immigrants. And they haven't risen up against their curses, the bitter affliction. And then along comes the bad orange man. And finally, they're mobilized to fight against Trump, to fight against MAGA. Trump's battle is not even with Canada. It's with this radical left leadership that the United States knows a little something about, thanks to the dear leader. Thanks to Barack Obama. Trudeau was cut from the same cloth. How many years was he over Canada? And then Carney, he's cut from the same cloth as well. The country living under the curse of bad leadership. And they're not alone. It's all over the world. I mean, even what you see Elon Musk and his team uncovering, exposing. You want to cheer on one hand, and then on the other hand, you think, how does this get solved? If something like 40% of the calls into Social Security every day are fraudulent, people trying to steal money from the government, which to this point has been more than happy to just throw it out there. Yeah. 40%. How do you eliminate this? How do you change something like this, where the corruption and the fraud is just so deeply embedded into our DNA? We'll come to that. Sundance had some interesting things to say about the latest dispute between Canada and America. Canada's Prime Minister, Mark Carney, delivers a speech to the nation notifying the Canadian people that the era of an economic and military collaborative relationship between the United States and Canada is over. That's what he said yesterday. And then Donald Trump reaches out to him today. Yeah, Orange Hitler, the one that no one can work with, evidently. If we're just to believe the narratives coming out of Europe, coming out of Canada. Now, as I say, dialogue is not going to solve all the problems of this world. Dialogue is what's prophesied to be happening all over the place just before there's sudden destruction. That's in 1 Thessalonians 5. It says here, as the majority of Canadians cheer, the Prime Minister said that Canada, as a free, independent, and sovereign nation, will now embrace its connections to the United Kingdom and the European Union to seek to replace their national dependency on the United States by severing ties in North America. I mean, this is astonishing. That you forget about what Donald Trump says for a moment and think about what these two leaders, the top two leaders, you could say, in Canada said just yesterday. And then one of them voted in for 4 more years. It says here, when questioned if Canada would join the EU, a seemingly natural fit for the ideologically aligned country, Carney said nothing is off the table. I mean, the communist leadership in Canada is actually considering joining the EU, assuming the EU would let him in. It says here, the entire Canadian border. Well, let me just back up. And again, this is an American writing this. But listen to some of these things that the Trump administration has asked of Canada. He asked Trudeau and the Canadian government to close the border to narco traffickers and shut down the pipeline of Chinese fentanyl. The Canadian government chose not to, and the Prime Minister Carney, continues the refusal. The entire Canadian border enforcement system, agents, support personnel, and the entire operation for the 5,000-mile border consists of 300 people. Not exactly a strong commitment to border security. It's no problem for Canada. Just let them flow into the U.S. It's not as bad as the Mexico border, obviously, but it's still bad, and America still needs help. America's requested the help, and nothing really has happened. Trump asked the Canadian government to remove trade tariffs, remove non-tariff trade barriers, and initiate reciprocal trade. The Canadian government chose not to. And again, by Canadian government, you're talking about a communist regime. President Trump asked the Canadian government to stop being a pass-through for Chinese goods that violates the USMCA. The Canadian government chose not to. President Trump asked the Canadian government to open access to U.S. banks and financial services. Canada said no. President Trump asked the Canadian government to live up to the NATO commitment of 2.5% GDP spending on military defense. The Canadian government said, no, you will defend us free of charge, and just accept it. I think, as President Trump's noted, Canada pays the least of all the NATO members. Canada destroyed most of their heavy industry and chases the climate change hoax in all economic policies. Canada is destroying itself. No help from the UK or EU is needed. This is what many Canadian commentators are missing. The fact that Canada is destroying itself. They don't need help from the EU. They don't need help from America. You would think the conservatives in Canada would be screaming at the top of their lungs. Forget about Trump. Look at the leadership we've had for decades. They're destroying themselves. Canada imported steel and aluminum from China, then shipped it into the USA, undercutting U.S. industry and trying to weaken U.S. heavy industry to match their own level of dependence. Eventually, President Trump said, enough. Eventually, President Trump said, 25% then, right across the board. And then that's led to this, what you heard yesterday. We're going to inflict as much pain on America as possible. As I say, Polivier, he's essentially, he's the conservative, and he's saying basically the same thing, which is just crazy. Canadians have no options except war with America. Well, we'll see what comes of the phone call earlier this morning. Judging by President Trump's take, it seems like Canada is really willing to at least come to the negotiating table. But what a wild time this is. And how easy is it to be intimidated into silence or to just conform with the mainstream, particularly if it's opposed to Trump. If you're on the never Trump side, well, you're going to get a lot of support from the regime media, from Marxist regimes. Sundance says President Donald Trump talks about placing tariffs on Canadian goods. Ontario Premier Doug Ford talks about inflicting as much pain as possible on the American people. See the difference? And yet, Trump! That's all you'll hear. They'll give Ford a pass. Why not? They'll give Carney a pass. Why not? I mean, they're good leftist leaders. They're good leftist radicals. And the media, they love them. They just love the leftist radicals. And they hate all things Trump. Doug Ford announces the Canadian government intention to inflict as much pain as possible. Well, as I say, Canada, depending on how this plays out, could turn out to be quite a foothold into America or North America for the rising beast. We wrote in an article, this was posted recently at thetrumpet.com, the War of 1812 in 2025. It says the two nations received these promises starting in 1800, talking about the U.S. and Britain. And again, if you haven't read this master text about Bible prophecy and where we fit in, America, Canada, the UK, little Judah in the Middle East, make sure you call our operators today and request your free copy. You see the number 1-866-930-3024. These are brothers, the U.S. and Britain. The U.S. and Britain, brothers, going back to the pages of Genesis. And because of God's prophecies, because of God's promises to Abraham, they both experienced this sudden spurt to world power. Starting in the early 1800s, Britain began to sprout as an empire and America began to dominate North America. The War of 1812 was a clash between these two brothers. So there is some history showing that the brothers, they can clash. I mean, this is how America even started, with a clash against Ephraim. Happened again in 1812. It says, in this critical period, God drew clear borders between them. As God directs history and prophecy, he also decides the habitations of nations. It was prophesied, you see, for Britain to become the single greatest empire in history, and for the United States to become the single greatest superpower in history. And God was separating the two brothers and giving America the choicest piece of real estate on earth, where it could become self-sufficient, where it really doesn't need help from others through trade. And Donald Trump sees that evidently better than anybody, because he's also seen what we've done to ourselves. This is what Canadians should be looking at. Look at what we've done. Look at how we've squandered these blessings. Look at the corrupt leadership that we've had. Look at how dependent we are on social programs. It's been this way, just not as bad, but it very nearly led to America being blotted out, just like 2 Kings 14 says. We have much more on that, of course, in America Under Attack. God intervened. to save America by the hand of Jeroboam. This article says, in many ways, the trade war between Canada and America is a replay of the War of 1812. Both sides will suffer unnecessary casualties because of a lack of humility. Understanding their biblical identity and Bible prophecy would diffuse any physical disputes. That's from our website, thetrumpet.com. We have all of our literature available at the site. We've got, of course, the printed Trumpet magazine. Comes out every month. There's no cost, no obligation for any of our literature. You can get to it by calling the 800 number or ordering the literature freely at our website. When we come back, we have this week's installment of WorldWatch and then quite a bit more to get through to, including this fascinating, revealing interview between Bret Baier of Fox News and Elon Musk, and then also several members of the DOGE team. As I said earlier today to the staff, I mean, is there a more transparent government agency than DOGE? Has there ever been? I mean, here they are. I mean, DOGE.com. They show all the receipts. They show what they're finding. And then they're just casually explaining to Bret Baier last night and a nationwide audience, yeah, this is what we're finding. This is how much fraud there is in Social Security. We're actually trying to get in there and help people to receive their Social Security benefits. We're not doing away with anything except for the fraud, the waste. There's plenty of that to go around. We'll go through some clips from that interview when we come back as well. You're listening to Stephen Flurry, and this is the Trumpet Daily. We'll be right back.
Are we living in the last days? Some dismiss the notion as fanatical, but world leaders and news analysts are issuing warnings that are becoming more and more dire. Could Bible prophecies about the last days actually be accurate? Our brochure can help guide you through the relevant news and history and help you compare these events to what the Bible says. Are we living in the last days? This brochure is available for free right now at thetrumpet.com.
China's military is more ready than ever to surround and blockade Taiwan to try to force it into submission, the Wall Street Journal reported on March 23rd. In increasingly large and intense drills in recent months, Chinese forces have encircled Taiwan and simulated blockades. In October 2024, a record 125 Chinese military aircraft took part in large-scale drills simulating a blockade of Taiwan. In December, Taiwan raised its alert level when around 90 Chinese Navy and Coast Guard ships were detected around the island for military drills. Then last week, an extraordinarily large number of Chinese military ships, planes, and drones entered the airspace and waters surrounding Taiwan. Beijing said the drills were a response to statements and actions by the U.S. and Taiwan. Taiwan relies on imports of oil, coal, and natural gas for 96% of its power. It also imports around 70% of its food supply. A blockaded island would have no choice but to submit to China. To learn more about Taiwan's future, read Trumpet Editor-in-Chief Gerald Flurry's article, Taiwan Betrayal. Support for the European Union among its citizens has reached a record high, according to a Eurobarometer poll published on March 25th. The poll found that 74% of EU citizens believed their nation's membership in the bloc benefited them. This marks the highest percentage since the question was first asked in 1983. 89% of respondents say Europe still needs greater unity to confront international challenges. Security fears are playing a significant role in promoting regional unity across Europe as Russia's aggression intensifies and the U.S. shows itself uninterested in honoring its traditional alliances. Europe is rapidly and dramatically rearming, and a growing proportion of its citizens support these efforts and overall moves toward European unification. The Bible prophesies of a united European superpower rising on the scene to play a pivotal role in explosive world events. To learn more about how Europe will rapidly unite into a 10-nation military juggernaut, read our Trends article, Why the Trumpet Watches Europe's Ongoing Unification Project. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi called for stronger ties with Europe during a meeting with his Portuguese counterpart in Beijing on March 25th. Wang said China will work with Portugal to promote Chinese-European relations. European and Chinese leaders are increasingly interested in cooperation in the face of a looming trade war with the U.S. Chinese-European trade relations were strained last year as the EU imposed double-digit tariffs on Chinese imports of electric vehicles. But with the threatening policies of the new Trump administration, China and Europe have shown an increasing willingness to rethink their relationship. The Bible indicates that Europe and China will soon team up in an economic mart of nations, working together to freeze the U.S. out of world trade. To learn about these prophecies in detail, read Preparing to Storm America's Castle. To learn more about current world news and how it relates to Bible prophecy, please visit thetrumpet.com.
For you, what's the most astonishing thing you've found out in this process?
The sheer amount of waste and fraud in the government. It is astonishing. It's mind-blowing. We routinely encounter wastes of $1 billion or more, casually. For example, like the simple survey that was literally 10-question survey that you could do with SurveyMonkey, cost you about $10,000. The government was being charged almost $1 billion for that.
For just the survey?
$1 billion for a simple online survey. Do you like the national park? And then there appeared to be no feedback loop for what would be done with that survey.
There's a lot of mystery about Social Security and a lot of words about it from, here's what Democrats have been saying about it.
It's absurd that Elon Musk is trying to eliminate billions of dollars from Social Security.
Elon Musk and President Trump have set their sights on cutting Social Security.
Their goal is clear: destroy Social Security from within.
You're in the building. I mean, you're in the computers. What's happening there? What are you doing?
Yeah, it doesn't line up with my experience on the ground. And I'll say the two improvements that we're trying to make to Social Security are helping people that legitimately get benefits, protect them from fraud that they experience every day on a routine basis, and also make the experience better. And I'll give you one example is at Social Security, one of the first things we learned is that they get phone calls every day of people trying to change direct deposit information. So when you want to change your bank account, you can call Social Security. We learned 40% of the phone calls that they get are from fraudsters. 40%? That's right. Almost half.
Yes, and they steal people's Social Security is what happens. Is they call in, they say, they claim to be a retiree, then they convince the Social Security person on the phone to change where the money's flowing. It actually goes to some fraudster. This is happening all day, every day.
There are in the federal government around 4.6 million credit cards for around 2.3 to 2.4 million employees. This doesn't make sense.
Right.
And so one of the things all of the teams have worked on is we've worked with the agencies and said, do you need all of these credit cards? Are they being used? Can you tell us physically where they are?
4.6 million credit cards, and there's 2.3 million federal workers. So 2 cards per worker. And we don't even know where they are. And then Social Security, you heard the middle part of that montage. Chuck Schumer, they're destroying Social Security from within. No, that would be fraudsters. And a lot of the problem comes down to these fraudsters in government. In government. They've been getting away with this for decades. They hate DOGE. You heard some of the Democrats. They hate DOGE because they don't want any accountability. They do not want to be scrutinized, to be audited. The only time they talk about accountability is with that text message that was in the Pete Hegseth chat. Well, it wasn't even his. Walt set it up. And then they're calling for Hegseth's head because one journalist was in the group chat and heard about the Houthis, and then later there was actually a successful attack on the Houthis. No accountability when it comes to Afghanistan and 13 U.S. Marines being murdered. Nobody at the Pentagon should be fired for that. The Democrats are asleep when that happens. Same with Benghazi. And then all of this government fraud, U.S. aid, judges have ruled and said, send the money to U.S. aid. Make sure it all goes out, even if it's fraudulent. And then, of course, as you heard, Social Security. Chuck Schumer saying they're trying to destroy Social Security. And then here comes the DOGE team, as I say, as transparent as you could be. And they should be cheering it. They're not. They're going after DOGE, they're going after Musk, and of course they're going after Hegseth. Why? Accountability. We've got to hold him to account. These people have exposed themselves. How could anyone who pays taxes, forget about left and right, forget about Republican and Democrat, we're coming up to tax day, April 15th. If you're fairly wealthy in this nation, the government's taking about half of your income. Even the middle class probably loses 30 to 40% by the time you add up income tax, sales tax, property tax, tax on gas, tax on whatever else at the store. You would think people would be cheering. Tax dollars pay the salary of Chuck Schumer. And here all of this waste, this fraud's being exposed. As I said at the start, I mean, on the one hand, you cheer for it. On the other hand, you think, it's 40%. I mean, this goes from head to toe, this kind of sickness, just like Isaiah prophesied. And then you begin to think, okay, look at what we're doing to ourselves. That's what Americans should be asking. That's what Canadians should be asking. That's what the British should be asking. In Britain, they're going after the knives because there's so much knife crime. So get rid of the knives. And we know what Ephraim thinks about the guns. Nothing is working in government. It's not for the people. It's not to make the country better. Now, God intervened through Jeroboam to save us from being blotted out entirely. But it's not a permanent saving or salvation by any means. All of these individuals interviewed by Bret Baier should be congratulated, rewarded, promoted. Listen to this clip from that same exchange, clip 2.
Some people say this shouldn't take a rocket scientist. Steve Davis, you are a rocket scientist.
Used to be.
Yeah, and now essentially you're the chief operating officer of DOGE, day-to-day operations. Fair to say?
Yeah, part of the DOGE team.
So how did you end up here? What's the biggest challenge you see?
The reason I'm here, which is probably for many, is that I think the goal is incredibly inspiring. I think most of the taxpayers in the country would agree that in order to have the country going bankrupt would be a very bad thing, and therefore the country going not bankrupt is a good thing. That all of us are willing to kind of put our lives on hold in order to do. I think the thing that's special right now is we actually believe there's a chance to succeed, that there's an administration that's supportive and a great cabinet and just a great group that will actually make success a possible outcome. And I think that's, given the inspiring mission and given the non-zero chance of success, it was worth doing.
I think the goal is incredibly inspiring. We're trying to prevent the nation from going bankrupt. What a horrible message. These, as you heard, he's a rocket scientist. These people have put their lives on hold, including Elon Musk. He was asked recently, I played the clip, how do you keep SpaceX and all these other businesses you have going when you're doing this much for the government or for DOGE? And he said, it's not easy. They all could be doing so many other things if they were just purely motivated by selfishness. Steve Davis says, I think the goal is incredibly inspiring. Well, he's an inspiration, and there aren't that many of them in the world today. People that would just set aside personal ambition or gain or whatever goals you have individually and say, I want to try to help the country not go bankrupt. They talked about just how transparent this temporary agency is. I mean, they're only going to be around for a year and a half. Clip 3.
Taking it one step further, DOGE then publishes these things on our website for maximum transparency. So now the general public, it would have been impossible for the general public to have seen that. Now anyone can just log into doge.gov anytime and see these payments. As they're not yet in real time, they're close, but they'll probably be in real time within the next few weeks.
But the process, it still involves Congress, right? At some level?
We try to keep Congress as informed as possible, but the law does say that money needs to be spent correctly. It should not be spent fraudulently or wastefully. It's not contrary to Congress to avoid waste and fraud. It is consistent with the law and consistent with Congress.
It's consistent with the one thing I would add here, though, is Congress is responsible for spending the money, for sending it out. And really, there should be congressional oversight for how that it's spent as well. And this is exposing congressional leadership. Decades and decades of fraud and waste, cheating, stealing. As if Congress could now come in and say, what did Schumer say? This man here, is destroying Social Security. Listen to his team as they talk about Social Security. Clip 5.
The Social Security Administration website crashed 4 times in 10 days this month because the servers were overloaded, blocking millions of retirees and disabled veterans from logging into their online accounts. Freaked people out. Is that going to change?
Yes, we're going to make sure that the website stays online.
Yeah. I mean, but is it a result of going in there
No.
or something you're doing?
No. The amount of issues that were with the Social Security system are enormous. As an example, there are over 15 million people that are over the age of 120 that are marked as alive in the Social Security system.
And that's an accurate figure.
Yes.
Correct.
15 million.
Correct. This has been something that's been identified as a problem. Again, pre-existing problems since 2008 at least, from an IG report. And so 15 to 20 million Social Security numbers that were clearly fraudulent were floating around that can be used only for bad intentions. There'd be no way to use those for good intentions.
Since 2008, that's the start of the dear leader's reign. One term for Barack Obama, then a second one. Then Trump's in there, attacked, just mercilessly attacked, viciously attacked for 4 years. And then along comes the fake president. And now here's DOGE, 16 years on, saying that there's 15 million people on the Social Security rolls that are over 120 years old. There's fraud and sickness from top to bottom. And what does Chuck Schumer do? He just gets up and he lies. They want no accountability, except for Pete Hegseth. He should be fired. They want no oversight. They want no auditing. They want no part of tightening their financial belts. They are not interested in saving U.S. taxpayers money. Not in the least. They've been exposed. They're part of the fraud, aren't they? Of course they are. Because now they're trying to fight against the exposure. They're trying to cover it back up. Listen again to this exchange, clip 6.
When I say that our job is tech support, I really mean it.
Yeah.
We have to fix the computers. If the computers can't talk to each other, you can't get research done. If the computers can't stay online, people won't receive their Social Security. So what we have here are a bunch of failing computer systems that are preventing people from receiving their benefits, that are preventing people from preventing research from happening, that are extremely vulnerable to fraud, and we're fixing it. The ways that the government is defrauded is that the computer systems don't talk to each other. So if the computer systems don't talk to each other, then you can exploit that gap. And fraudsters exploit that gap to take advantage. For example, there were over $300 million of Small Business Administration loans that has been given out to people under the age of 11.
Well, actually, to add to it, it's $300 million under the age of 11 and over $300 million to over the age of 120.
Yeah, the government giving out loans to the tune of $300 million to children under the age of 11 or over the age of 120. Hundreds of millions of dollars, billions. I suspect trillions when it's all said and done. Look at the money that just pours into D.C., the swamp, the deep state. And look at how they squander it. Look at what they put it toward. I think I have one more from this fascinating interview, clip 7.
One, we're changing the culture. The culture has been not a lot of caring and not a lot of commitment to doing what's right relative to financial operations. There's a $500 billion of fraud every year. There's hundreds of billions of dollars of improper payments, and we can't pass an audit. The consolidated financial report is produced by Treasury, and we cannot pass it on. We have material weaknesses. What that means is that if I was a public company CFO, I would effectively be removed. I couldn't file financial statements. I couldn't issue securities, which of course we depend on. Can't pass an audit. Right.
And just keep in mind, we're talking here about the United States of America, the world's last best hope. And look at where we are. What would the founders think of what has happened to Washington, D.C., to government? Again, this is so-called democracy. It's a republic. But as I say, the world's last best hope. And here is where we are, $500 billion in fraud every year, hundreds of billions in improper payments. How do you root all of this out? They just passed a continuing resolution, which basically sent money to all these government agencies, the same amount as they did when Joe Biden was there. So Congress didn't change anything. It's the DOGE people trying to change things. And we'll see how much success they have at doing that in the end. Donald Trump was talking the other day about what DOGE is uncovering and just how close America was to total disaster, bankruptcy. This is clip 11.
And to me, something that was just terrible is the contracts that we're finding, the fraudulent contracts that we're finding where millions and millions of dollars and even billions of dollars in some cases were given out. But we've had many fraudulent contracts that were caught by the work that Elon and his people are doing and working with our people. It's been brought to light that the fraud, not just waste and abuse, the fraud has been incredible. You mentioned one, Madam Secretary.
Well, yes, sir. Well, let me just add to that, and thank you. We just had a wonderful cabinet meeting, all aligned on certainly the effort to realign the government. But even at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, we've canceled a $300,000 contract educating on food justice for queer and transgender farmers in San Francisco. A similar contract we canceled in New York.
We like to use the words waste and abuse because they sort of sound good, but many of these things are pure fraud. And our country was riddled with fat, like no country probably anywhere in the world. And we're getting rid of the fat. We're trying to save our country and make our country great again. I mean, you could say it, but we're trying to save our country from this extraordinary thing that was happening. What they were doing to our country was just a horrible thing.
You know, it just occurred to me listening to this. Canadian leaders, British leaders, Australian leaders, New Zealand, they probably could learn a few things here from the approach that Donald Trump and the DOGE team are taking, because all the Israelite countries are deep in debt. They all struggle with the same sins that we've seen in our nations for decades. Look at what we're doing to ourselves. We had an article at thetrumpet.com. This is back in 2009, first year of the dear leader's term, first term, Barack Obama, America the Corrupt. The late Ron Fraser, he wrote, fraud rolls across American history like waves move onto a beach. Quoting from a book there, he says, after all, it's well known that fraud and under-the-table payoffs were endemic to certain Asian countries. It was simply the way that one did business there. That was taken as a given. But America, the city on the hill, the bastion of Judeo-Christianity, this exemplar of free democracy and free enterprise, deeply corrupted? Is this really possible? Could this happen to the single greatest superpower in history? Mr. Fraser said, it seems that each week, sometimes even day by day, in any given week, the Wall Street Journal publicizes yet another case of corporate, financial, or government fraud in America. He writes, America is sick at its heart. Just like the prophet Isaiah describes, sickness. Terminal moral disease eats at its vitals from the very top of its government machine to the common drug pushers on its decaying city streets. We need to clean things up. And we could use your help, Mexico. We could use your help, Canada, to stop the flow of fentanyl, all of the narcotics, the sex trafficking. There's a sickness here. We're sick at heart. We need things fixed. We need things healed. We need a physician. This is the message that Israelite leaders should be meditating on. What can we do to turn this around, to hold our leaders to account, to make sure that there is accountability? That's what's so sickening when you hear them talking about Pete Hegseth of all things. Now they're Benghazi didn't matter. Nobody at the Pentagon got fired over that. Come on. I mean, Americans were murdered. Same with Afghanistan, and lots of Afghans too. Nobody at the Pentagon got fired, but we're worried, in the case of Democrats, we're worried about a text in a chat. Here's clip 12.
Mr. Hegseth, this is not a hoax. It's very real and very serious. You should not be in your job.
Pete Hegseth, who shared those plans on the Signal chat, should absolutely resign.
We will not let this go. Secretary Hegseth needs to resign immediately. He is unqualified, he is incompetent, and he is endangering American soldiers and our national security.
And that's why I called for the Secretary of Defense's resignation. And if he doesn't resign, I think the president is in his rights and should, fire him, dismiss him.
It does beg the question, where's this guy when you need him?
I love to fire people that didn't do their job. I fired a lot of people that didn't do them. I fire them. You didn't do your job. I'm sorry. Say hello to your family. You're fired. Get out.
Where is that guy?
That guy is firing a lot of people, in fact. Tens of thousands in radical judges, gangsters in robes. President Boasberg and others, just like him, are demanding that these federal employees not be fired. But Hegseth, now that's different. Of course you've got to fire him. He's a Fox News host. It's so obvious who the target is here. Hegseth didn't even set up the chat. It's so obvious that it's all coordinated as well. If you look closely, you see similarities with the Russia collusion hoax, the impeachment hoax, all these things. This one's, it's just not, it doesn't have the teeth that some of those other attacks had. The New York Times the other day, the White House effort to defend Hegseth on Wednesday leaned heavily into a semantic argument. What he posted on the now infamous Signal chat with his national security colleagues was not a war plan, they insist. Technically, they may be right. But listen, as you heard there in the montage, we're not going to let this go. It appears as if it's already gone. Nobody's taking these people seriously anymore. On the one hand, they say what you just heard there, and then on the other hand, Musk is destroying federal agencies, Social Security, COVID. It's very similar to the COVID scaremongering. That's all they have. Listen to Jesse Waters. There's a bit here from the White House Press Secretary Leavitt, together with Waters' commentary, clip 13.
If this story proves anything, it proves that Democrats and their propagandists in the mainstream media know how to fabricate, orchestrate, and disseminate a misinformation campaign quite well. And there's arguably no one in the media who loves manufacturing and pushing hoaxes more than Jeffrey Goldberg. Goldberg is an anti-Trump hater. He is a registered Democrat. Goldberg's wife is also a registered Democrat and a big Democrat donor who used to work under who? Hillary Clinton. This is the same Jeffrey Goldberg who infamously lied about weapons of mass destruction to get us into the Iraq War, which cost trillions of dollars and thousands of American soldiers.
Benghazi, Lewinsky, Obamagate. This isn't it. And it looks like the reporter got a lot wrong.
That reporter also indicated that I had released the name of an undercover CIA operative in that signal chat. In fact, I had released the name of my chief of staff, who is not operating undercover.
Vance says Goldberg oversold what he had, and Democrats couldn't even tell you what the scandal was in the first place.
That's from the other night. I've got another one from his show. I think we can probably skip it, but he's talking about all of this government funding going into NPR and PBS. There's a great exchange between Congressman Gill and this NPR woman, as he's just going through her text messages, or sorry, her tweets on X from just a few years ago, showing just how much of a radical and extremist she is. And yet they present themselves as this fair and balanced news organization, NPR, PBS, and they're radical leftist outfits or media outlets funded by U.S. taxpayers. More waste, more fraud. How much of it gets eliminated? We'll see. We'll see. The section I was just going to go through. Well, actually, I think I have time to just quickly read this verse. This is Matthew 24 and verse 3. I was going to get into this later today in the Life and Teachings class, but it says here, this is 3 days before Jesus is crucified, and of course you read this whole chapter, the Olivet prophecy. I mean, it just lays it out there for us. It says, and as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of your coming and the end of the world, or the end of this age?" He's on the Mount of Olives, and my father writes this in Jerusalem's temples. It says, at this point, the disciples asked Christ about the end of this age, the time we're living in today. It says Christ knew that most of the disciples would face martyrdom, so he wanted to get their minds on his second coming and the wonderful millennium. It says the Messiah is trying to get all of us to focus on his coming. And we could add to that, to focus on his government, God's government, and Jesus Christ's reign as King of Kings and Lord of Lords, when all of this waste, this fraud, this corruption, this sickness will finally be healed. The sickness will finally be cured. Righteous government is coming. A utopia is coming to this earth, and we're not very far from it. That's all we have time for on today's show, the fastest moving hour in broadcasting. You're listening to Stephen Flurry, and this is the Trumpet Daily. We thank you for joining us today. Thank you, some of you, for joining us all week, and we'll see you next time.